All right, welcome back to Environmental Science. Earlier in this chapter, we learned about the experimental method or the scientific method. We learned about the scientific habits of the mind, things such as skepticism, intellectual honesty. We also studied some statistics, how statistics are used, and what exactly are statistics. They are a collection and classification of data in some numerical form that we can analyze and that we can run statistical analyses on. Then we looked yesterday at some different types of models. Models are simply representations of some sort of system or some sort of object and how it works. There are four basic models. The first type was a physical model with 3D, such as the styrofoam balls with the solar system. They can be smaller, such as the solar system, or they can be larger than the actual, such as an atom. And then we had graphical models, most common of which would be maps. And then we had conceptual models. Conceptual models are verbal or even graphical explanations of how organization works or how things are flowing. I talked about flow charts, and I showed you the little video clip of I'm my own grandpa. And then the last type is the mathematical model. Those are used extensively, particularly with weather, because there are a lot of factors to it. And so using mathematical models allows you to put in a lot of different variables and hopefully get a correct outcome. So that brings us to today's topic. I'm going to ask you, how do you decide what you're going to decide? How do you make your decisions? What kind of thought process do you go through in order to make decisions? You're all taking environmental science. What thoughts went through your mind as you were preparing for this school year? Well, when we make decisions, there are several aspects that we automatically go through in our minds. We ask ourselves some basic questions. In some cases, it's going to be, how will this affect me? How will this affect other people? How much is it going to cost? Is it right versus is it wrong? Now, not every single decision that we make is going to go through all of these. When you chose environmental science, whether it was ethical or not probably did not really cross your mind. However, how it was going to affect you likely did. How much work is going to be involved? What are my alternatives? Is there a better class that I can take, or is this the one that I should take? Maybe part of that decision was made for you because of other classes not being offered that are within your schedule. But we are all going to go through a lifelong process of making decisions. When we look at different values of what we consider important, those are value judgments. Values are the principles and the standards that we consider important to us. For me, a car is not really all that important in my world. I need a car, but I don't necessarily have to have the latest and greatest. I don't have to have it look pretty. I just need it to get me from point A to point B with some reasonable amount of consistency. But for other people, that car is very important in their value system. They want a new car. They want it to be nice and shiny. They want to have a certain type of car. For some people, aesthetics is a huge, huge deal. Aesthetics is what is beautiful or what is pleasing. Mr. Canterbury does a fabulous job with a campus. He looks at the aestheticness of our campus. What can make it look prettier? Some people, it's economic. Is there a money gain or a money loss? As you decide what you're going to do with your future, probably one of the biggest questions you have is, how much can I make doing this particular job, going into this particular field? That is an economic type of question. There might be environmental types of questions. such as how is this going to affect the environment around me? Is this going to be good, or is this something that we're going to have to pay for time and time again as time goes on? It could be educational. Can I learn more from this particular class than I can from another class? How is it going to impact my overall life? Is this going to be beneficial for me for what I want to do in the future? It could be ethical and moral, right or wrong. It could be something dealing with your health. Is this something that's going to increase my health, or is this something that's going to be a detriment to my health? It could even be something that's recreational or leisurely type activities. How is that going to encourage me? It could be a scientific understanding about the natural world or some sort of social or cultural aspect that you're involved in and looking at. So today we're going to take a look very quickly at what we call the decision-making model. It is a conceptual model. Conceptual models are like the flow charts that I talked about yesterday. It's a conceptual model that helps us in our decision-making process. Now, all of you are at Sefner Christian Academy. Your parents at some point decided to put you in this school. Now, for some of you, you may have been here since the day after you were born. For others of you, this is your first year. So what kind of a process do you think your parents went through when they decided to send you to this particular school? Well, chances are they gathered some sort of information. That information could have just been word of mouth. If you're new to the school, it could be that you even moved from another state and your parents were just thrown into the situation and they scrambled. We've got to find a school for my child. And so they may have just started scouring the internet. They may have talked to people at their church or other people. What schools have a good name? It could be that you're good in sports, and so your parents were looking at, I want a school that has a good sports program. I want a school that has a good academic program. Depending on what their values are, that is going to decide where they're going to gather their information. So how do we gather information? Well, the most common type nowadays is through the internet. But you have to be very careful with the internet. Not everything is trustworthy. We can watch news. Sometimes, depending on what our decision is, the news can be very, very beneficial in informing us of information. We can read news articles. We can read periodicals and magazines. We can talk to professionals. If you were wanting to do investments, you probably would search on what kind of investments are out there, and then you would likely go to somebody who is involved in investments. Either they regularly invest or they're something like an investment broker. And you're going to gather information from somebody who you consider to be knowledgeable. But we've got to gather the information. Then we take that information and we decipher through it and we consider how does this information meet with all of my values? Is what they consider important, is that important in what I'm looking for? So we've got to consider our values. When you chose this class, maybe one of your values was, I don't want to have to work very hard. And so I don't like math. I don't want a class that has a lot of math in it. So I'm not going to take physics. Uh, there's a lot of weird stuff in biology and anatomy. There's a lot of memorization on that. I don't want to go through that much memorization. And so I'm going to take what I would think would be the easier class and take environmental science. Now, for some of you, you may have not thought that way. You may have thought, oh, environmental science, the environment's all around us, and I think it would be important for me, since I have to take a science class anyway, it would be important for me to understand some of the basics about our environment and how it works. And so that's why you chose this class. So what did you do? You gathered information and then you weighed it against your personal values. And then we explore the consequences of the various decisions. For your parents, what is the consequence of me sending my child to this school? All right, well, it's going to cost money. It's a private school, therefore, I'm going to have to pay tuition. If your parents are very tight on money, that is going to be a heavier portion of their value system than somebody who is not tight on money. But they also consider, well, if I don't send my child to Sefner and I send them to a public school, are they going to get the quality of education that I want them to get? And the answer is probably no. And so they weighed their principles and their values, and they explored the consequences of both or multiple decisions, because there are multiple places that you could have been sent. But your parents chose to weigh all of their values and look at all the consequences of their particular decision. And then finally, they made a decision. Now, as a Christian, I would add one more in here. And it doesn't really matter where it goes as long as it happens before making the decision, and that would be prayer. Not a whole lot that was discussed today, but a very, very critical portion, and that is of decision making. So we want to gather information, we want to consider all the values, we want to explore the consequences, and we want to make the final decision. That concludes chapter 2 of our environmental science text.